Okay, I think I look to the team. We are we are go, aren't we? I think yes. Brad, croeso ar y session heddiw. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's session, which I think of as the grand finale of webinars. This is the last one that we're doing. Um, I won't ask anyone to reveal themselves, but I'm curious if anyone has been to all of them so far, and in which case I hope you found them useful. So today's session, we're looking at two of the complaints that are set out, two of the conditions that are set out in our regulatory framework. One being the condition on complaints, and the other being the condition on learner protection plans. And we're joined by Hannah and Nicola, who have been Medr's leads on these areas respectively, who will be talking a bit through the rationale, what we're trying to achieve with them, and some of the thinking that's gone behind what you see in the consultation. You have the opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A function on the sidebar. We'll where we can, we'll answer them as and when, but we'll also have an opportunity towards the end of the session to come back together and look through the questions that have come up in the chat bar. And when we can't answer them today, we'll do our best to come back to people or reflect it in our FAQs. The other thing to flag is we're recording the session today. It will be put up on our YouTube channel, and we'll be circulating the link to attendees once it's up. So if there's anything you just want to come back to or anything you think worth sharing with colleagues, it will be available online for people to watch again. I won't be because I don't like hearing my voice, but you may want to hear it again. I'm going to hand over to Hannah first to talk through the complaints condition and some of the thinking and rationale that's gone behind that one. Thank you. So over to you, Hannah. I'll pop you on the screen.
Diolch, Kieran. Let me move my screens around as well. Fab. Print hand out, everybody. My name is Hannah Riley. I'm the Senior Learner Engagement Manager at Medr, and as Kieran said, here to talk to you about the complaints procedures, condition of registration and funding. So the Tertiary Education and Research Act requires Medr to take steps to ensure that relevant providers have procedures in place for investigating complaints made by learners and former learners about an act or omission of the provider. And also to make sure that you are taking reasonable steps to make sure that your learners are aware of those procedures. We have opted to create an ongoing condition of registration to follow this, and a condition of funding to be kind of the vehicles by which we make sure that providers have those procedures in place and are making learners aware of them. For those providers opting to join Medr's register, this will be an ongoing condition of registration, and for funded providers, it will be a condition of funding. So this condition applies to providers of higher education, further education, apprenticeships, and adult community learning. The compliance requirements is going to make me sound like I'm repeating myself, but we have followed the wording of the Act to create the condition of registration. So the compliance requirements are to have in place those procedures for investigating complaints made by your learners or former learners about an act or omission of the provider, and also to take reasonable steps to make the procedures known to learners. We have opted to stick to the requirements within the Act at this point. We are aware that also there are other requirements for those of you under the scheme for the Office of Independent Adjudicator. Within their scheme, there's good practice guidance that you can follow around what your complaints procedures look like and the effectiveness of those complaints procedures. We haven't at this stage decided to duplicate or replicate any of that guidance, but it's something that we may choose to look at in the future, but we don't want to cause any, as I say, duplication or confusion when that is already in place for some providers and will be coming into place for other providers in the sector. So at the moment, this condition of registration and funding sticks strictly to the wording in the Act around having those procedures in place and making learners aware of them. So the way that we're proposing we will monitor compliance with this condition of registration and funding is on an annual basis through our annual assurance return that some of you will already be familiar with. So in the autumn term of each year, we retrospectively ask you for some information about the previous academic year. And in this case, we'll be asking you to provide your complaints procedure and evidence of where you make learners aware of that. So most likely you'll be sending us a link to your website where your complaints procedure is available. And that's what all we'll ask you for on an annual basis. We will also, on an ongoing basis, look at other evidence that's available to us. So if Medr receives complaints that are relevant to this condition, we can factor those into our monitoring discussions around compliance. We'll also consider data that we receive on complaints. So again, for those providers who are part of the OIA scheme, we will use the data provided by OIA to give us any kind of like thematic information about complaints procedures, and also where across our regulatory system we take a transparent approach. It means if you were to report to us an event or an issue that was relevant to this condition about your complaints procedures, then we would also factor that into our monitoring activities. As I've said, our proposed condition of registration and funding for the complaints procedures has been developed to be straightforward alignment with the Act and its requirements for Medr. So really it's quite a simple discussion for me to run through with you today, and I've kind of kept that as kind of high level and succinct as possible, but there's not really much more to say on the complaints conditions at the moment. So actually, hopefully you'll have some questions that I can expand on a little bit more at the end. But otherwise, I'm going to be handing over to Nicola to talk to you about learner protection plans.
Croeso pawb, my name is Nicola Hunt. I'm the Senior Quality and Continuous Improvement Manager at Medr and the lead for developing the Learner Protection Plan condition. I'm going to give a quick overview of learner protection plans and how we're proposing that they'll work. Our draft guidance is out for consultation at the moment, so we would encourage you to respond to the consultation and raise any issues so that we can reflect on them before we finalise the guidance. So Hannah, next slide, please. The Tertiary Education and Research Wales Act places a duty on Medr to prepare guidance on the preparation and revision of learner protection plans. Relevant providers must prepare and implement a learner protection plan when required to do so by Medr as an ongoing condition of funding and registration. Learner protection plans are defined in the Act as a document setting out the relevant tertiary education providers' arrangements for protecting the interests of persons undertaking a relevant course in the event of the course ceasing to be provided for any reason, and supporting a person who is undertaking a relevant course and who wishes to transfer to another course of tertiary education. Next slide, please, Hannah. So you'll see from the draft guidance that we've taken a slightly broader approach to what learner protection plans should cover. The key focus of learner protection plans is ultimately ensuring that learners are able to meet their learning outcomes, which would ideally be via the course that they originally enrolled on. We know that things can happen outside of a student's control which could affect this, so our guidance is designed to make sure that there are arrangements in place to support learners if this happens. We've taken this approach so that learner protection plans will be meaningful and based on real events or triggers. I think one key thing to note is that we aren't requiring all providers to have an ongoing learner protection plan. However, we would expect providers to do some contingency planning as a matter of course, and we know that this happens already. And as it says there, we're really aiming to ensure that there are effective learner protection arrangements across the sector. So that's what our guidance is intending to do. Next slide, please, Hannah. So we've included in the guidance some examples of possible triggers for a learner protection plan. These could be societal events, such as plagues, or issues affecting the educational environment, e.g. fires, system failures, and exploded wartime incendiary devices if you happen to be in Bridgend. There could be issues which arise as a result of a strategic and planned decision made by a provider. For example, that could be closing a course or a campus. So again, we've got some listed there on the screen. We've got some more details within the guidance itself. In terms of deciding whether a plan is needed, we'll be doing that on a case-by-case basis and being proportionate. We'll be seeking assurances from providers about what they're doing, and really we'll be beginning a dialogue with providers before we ask for an official plan. At that point, we'd be expecting to understand what has been done already in terms of planning and mitigation against any sort of impact of the decision or the event that has sort of triggered the conversation. We'll also want to see that learners have been involved in any relevant decision making before we then make a decision to ask for a plan. So this will pick up on the learner engagement code and the principles and requirements in there, and making sure the learners have actually informed the decision if it is something that's come, that's kind of come from a provider rather than sort of the external environment. Next slide, please, Hannah. Not too many more. So these are the information sources that we will use to help us determine whether we need to ask for a formal learning protection plan. We'll be working on the basis that providers will come and tell us of any relevant issues which could impact on learners and kind of do that proactively. If needs be, we will contact providers directly in the first instance if we hear of an issue through another source. So that could be one of these information sources or the national press, for example. As far as possible, we'll be using existing information to try and reduce the overall burden on any individual provider and the sector as a whole. And as I said, we'll be expecting providers to come to us with information on what they plan to do to mitigate the impact of an issue or a decision on learners. Next slide, please, Hannah. So if we do decide that a plan is needed once we've been through our assessment exercise, we will then give formal notice to a provider. The notice will set out all the details needed for Medr to be able to approve the plan, which providers will then need to implement. It's important for us to be able to see that learners, learner representatives and student unions where they exist have been involved in the development of learner protection plans to ensure that the plans are relevant and meaningful and will have a positive impact on the affected learners. Final slide, please, Hannah. So once a plan has been approved by Medr and is in place, we'll work with the provider to oversee completion of the actions in the plan. And once that's all kind of been finalised, we'll confirm to the provider that plan has been completed. And we then have a duty as Medr to report on the effectiveness of learner protection plans to Welsh Government in our annual regulatory report. So we'll be undertaking some form of effectiveness exercise once we've received some learner protection plans that we can evaluate and then report on in our annual report. Last slide, please, Hannah, just gives the email addresses for the learner engagement team and the quality team if you do have any questions, and I will hand back to Kieran.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you, Hannah. I'm just looking in the chat and we don't currently have any questions. I'll put the last slide back up on the screen just in case anyone did want to make a note of those email addresses to follow up separately. We'll just wait for a moment in case any questions do come through. Okay, so we've got a question from Heather, which is OIA only holds data on complaints that have been referred to them, so won't be a source of data for you on the effectiveness of the overall institutional approach to addressing complaints. Can you clarify how you will be using OIA data? Hannah, I think this one's for you. So I'll bring you back onto the screen.
Thank you. More broadly, so the OIA data is something that we're going to be looking at, not necessarily in terms of individual providers. It gives us more of that kind of thematic view across the sector. Kieran, you may be even more familiar than I am with exactly what's in that data and what we will be able to see further down the line. But I think the reason for mentioning it here is that we don't want to kind of duplicate any burden for providers that are already working with OIA around complaints data and then asking for the same data in. Sorry, I've just seen a message. I think another one of our colleagues was happy to come in on this too.
I think one of the things that OIA data has typically done in the past is it can indicate if there's an issue with internal processes, if there's a large number or spike of complaints coming through that either are upheld or not upheld, because it can indicate that something in the chain isn't working correctly if a lot of those complaints are then coming through to the OIA. But clearly you've indicated you want to come in on this.
We do look at the OIA data annually. The OIA gives the numbers of completions of procedures letters and so on, which is a useful indication to us. And as Kieran said, we're able to look at the proportion that come through. There have been specific examples when specific problems at institutions, for example, a London campus and so on, have flared up, and we've been able to see that spike in complaints. They also let us know if there are any case studies resulting from institutions in Wales, so we're able to follow up with those sort of on a thematic basis as well. So it's not the sole source of data, but it is certainly something that we do look at, and it helps inform our work because it is to try and focus on reducing duplication and making sure we do use all sources of evidence that are out there. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Theo. And I think, I mean, some of what we've touched on there is almost areas outside of the complaints condition, which is how it relates, how complaints more generally relate to our quality consideration. But there are, I think, specifically in terms of the complaints condition, there are things that could be indicated by OIA data, and what it suggests about how aware, for example, learners are of complaints processes. Thank you, Heather. Any other questions? Okay, I will, in that case, draw this to a close. Thank you, everyone. I think just to reiterate, those who want to kind of revisit the detail of what was discussed in the presentations, it will be available online. Similarly, please do follow up, again, contact afterwards if anything occurs to you, questions you want to raise, or anything else you want clarity on from the teams, and we will follow up with the contact. We will follow up with the contact details. We've just had a note, someone mentioning we've not made the chat available. That the chat isn't available, but you can, if you have a question, you can use the Q&A function to ask the question. So just in case people weren't aware of that, I will give an extra minute in case there are any questions that come through. So at the top of the window, it should say chat, Q&A, people. If you click the Q&A, that's where you're able to raise questions. Okay. Apparently it's not working, the Q&A function. It does seem to be turned on from my end. I think we'll have to close the session, but just to reiterate, please do get in touch. We'll have to pick up individual conversations on any areas of detail. Thank you for seamless whoever put that on the screen. Great. Brilliant, thank you all. Hope that was helpful. Do follow up as and when you need. More than happy to engage on any kind of areas of interest around these sections. Great, diolch. Thank you all.